Guy with the lights in the back. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Can everybody hear me? Kind of, sort of, maybe a little bit. Like the Cajun French say, comme ci, comme ça, a little bit. All right, we're going to get started this evening. First of all, thank you all for coming and joining us tonight and spending the evening with us. We appreciate it. Tonight, we have a special treat for everybody. We have Mr. Carl Ward that's going to be speaking with us this evening. Something that kind of struck me that I was thinking about that I was going to mention, there's a podcast, history podcast, a Civil War history podcast that I listen to called Threads from the National Tapestry. And they always kind of start off talking about the fact that history is not dates and places and battles, but it's people. It's about people. And they always mention the fact that the last 5 letters of the word history is story, which is true. You want to hear a story about what's going on. So we're going to hear Carl tonight talk about the story for $20 in gold, a story of the Civil War. Well, I don't have the clicker, so you're going to have to advance me. I was wondering why my left hand didn't have anything in it. Would everybody please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Allegiance to the flag of the United States. Under God, liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Any new folks here tonight that have never been to a meeting? Anybody new? Anybody want to admit that they're new? I did. I don't think I admitted when the first night I was here. In fact, I was telling somebody earlier, my very first night coming to a meeting, I didn't have any idea what I was getting into, and I just wanted to show up to see what it was all about. And I show up and walked in the door, and Bruce and Mike and Jim Gannon stuck a roll of tickets in my hand and said, "You're selling raffle tickets, kid. Here you go." And that's how I kind of got now. Here I am as the vice president of the organization. That's kind of how it works. Next. As we always put up there, the information to get a hold of us, our website, the QR code, email, access to our website. Send that to folks. If you know anybody that might be interested, send the information, send the website, send them the QR code. We're really trying to do a push on recruitment right now. So next meeting, bring a friend. Tell somebody about it. They might not know that we exist. So we're also looking to do some outreach. So if you have a neighborhood group, if you have a civic organization or somebody that, a community group that would like to have us come in and speak and talk to them a little bit about the Civil War in North Carolina, but a lot about what we're about and what we're doing, so we can maybe recruit some new members, let us know. Next. We're also doing some recruitment tonight. We're looking for anybody that might be interested in becoming our quartermaster, volunteering as quartermaster. Much thanks to our current quartermaster, William Jordan, for all the work he has done in the past. But we're looking for somebody that might want to take that on. It's basically doing a lot of things like setting up the room, handling the raffles, and things like that. So if anybody is interested in doing that, please let us know. Also, myself as vice president, closer to the end of the year, my term will be up. If anybody is interested in doing that as well, you don't have to do anything special. I'm doing it, so you really don't have to do anything special. Please let us know. Please get more involved in the organization. Next. And we also want to mention tonight of an upcoming tour of the Wilmington National Cemetery. This is going to be on May 16th. It's a Saturday at 10 o'clock. It's going to be led by our own Bill Jane and also Becky Sawyer, who's the collections manager and programs coordinator at Fort Fisher. It's going to be a lot about the history of the National Cemetery there, and especially about the 2000 Civil War burials that are there. Many of the sailors and Marines that fell at Fort Fisher were buried as unknowns at the Wilmington Cemetery. So if you're inclined, please join us on Saturday, May 16th at 10 o'clock. Is there anything you'd like to mention, Bill, about that?
The Wilmington National Cemetery is really kind of a microcosm of the whole system, and it's a system now of more than 150 national cemeteries around the country. So we'll get into the history of the whole system, how it got started, and the burials there. More than almost half of the burials in the whole cemetery are Civil War burials.
Awesome, thank you. Next. Also want to mention our meeting for next month, kind of continuing from last month, kind of a naval theme. We did last month the raising of the turret of the USS Monitor, and next month, May 14th, we'll be having Matt Young, who's going to do a history of the CSS Noose, which would be great. I've not been down there to see where it's located, to the site, so it'd be great to go through that and get some information about it first. So that's going to be next month, May 14th, the CSS Noose. Please join us. All right, without further ado, I'll announce our speaker this evening, Carl Ward, retired U.S. Army Colonel, 30 years of duty and a lifetime of service. He runs Lighthouse Management Consulting and is our platinum sponsor for the Civil War Roundtable. Military history instructor, assistant professor of military science, and of course a proud North Carolinian. So tonight he's going to tell us a little bit about the story of the Civil War history, Private James Ward of the 26th North Carolina. So please join me in welcoming Carl to speak with us.
I'm going to attach that also anywhere you want to.
I don't want to touch anything electronic. They've already threatened that if I touch too many at one time, I'll be electrocuted. And also there evidently is a device that will, if I'm boring you to death, it'll actually make me want to leave. We'll see how far that goes. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity. Being a platinum member was just a no-brainer to me. Having had an opportunity to be in multiple Civil War roundtables, including Gettysburg and Brunswick, not too far away. I love this one. Why? Because every presentation I've seen when I've been here, I've been impressed with the people and the questions they're asking. This story is really about my direct family from many, many decades and 150 plus years. So it's very personal to me. But most important, what I want to emphasize, it's looking at the war. If you're a military historian and you're looking for a battle map and lots of arrows going in all different directions with circles in blue and red, you're in the wrong meeting. This is about families and what's happening to the families in North Carolina and what's happening to the soldiers that they've sent away. So that's really what this story is about. So if I bore you with my family history, I do apologize in advance. But I hope that you'll see something a little bit intuitive about it. To me, it's about being North Carolina. Thank you for that notation at the bottom. It says proud North Carolinian. I was born here. I was raised here. I got married here. The Army was kind enough to send me here often. And the reality is I never lost my residency in 77 years. Why? Because both of my children were funded as North Carolina residents when they went to Appalachian State University, which, by the way, I went to school too, not in ROTC, but as a student and later as an assistant professor of military science. The story really is about that chest you see on the right-hand side of that painting, and I'll talk a little bit about the painting later. But the important thing is what I discovered when I was 14 years old in the family farmhouse, where every summer I left Greensboro and came back to the farm the first weekend after school was out, and I stayed there working on a farm until the weekend before school started back in the fall. So I understood what farm life is like. So the story is resonating throughout the journals and the letters that made the story happen. So the first thing I want to do is the chest is the key. At 14, a 14-year-old boy is wandering through an old farmhouse, and he finds a closet on the second level. And in that closet, behind all the coats, are 4 steps, 4 wooden steps. And there's a hole with a small door just big enough for a 14-year-old to crawl into. And he goes into the attic and he discovers a chest. The key is 154 letters written between a soldier and his brand new wife of 2.5 months. He goes to war less than 3 months into their marriage. I would suggest to you 14-year-old boys should not read letters written between 2 people who have only been married 3 months. I knew more by the time I was a senior in high school than anything my sex education teacher could possibly offer me. So just gives you an idea. In addition to the 154 letters, 9 journals, 6 by him, 3 by her. They're telling the story. I didn't have to. I didn't have to create dialogue. All I had to do was get out of the way. So now you've got a little bit of the background on what the story is about. And I'll talk a little bit about the research of the novel and how it was developed and a few of the resources that I used. And then I'm going to read a couple of passages from the book itself. And I hope it'll give you a sense of what the story is all about. He's telling what's happening to him and his troops in his letters. She's telling what's going on and wrong back home. And as the war proceeds, things are getting worse and worse. Anybody here ever read the book Cold Mountain? Bless your hearts. Well, you're going to see a lot of that in their journals, and you're going to hear the stories about what's going wrong at home by the time of 1863, as an example. If I never hand a ranger 2 weapons at one time, it confuses us. So the fact that I've got 2 devices working at one time, a little bit of history about me and my background. My lovely wife, Jolene, don't sing the song from Dolly Parton ever in front of her. It drives her crazy. So just for your information, this is the boring stuff, as I say. This is my family. I don't know how my 1960 Austin Healey Bug-Eyed Sprite got turned upside down, but that's my fault. So this is my family, and they're the most important thing I've ever done in my life. And I had 30 years in the U.S. Army, as you heard, and another 20 years on the contract side. So as they say, I bleed green. But that's my family. That gentleman right there is my son. He's an executive producer in Los Angeles. Notice that fiery red hair. I used to have fiery red hair like that, but I don't have that anymore. So just a little introduction to my family. I enlisted, yes, actually enlisted because my draft notice, our draft number was picked, and I was so low on that order, I knew I was going to get drafted. So I went and thought I'd beat the Army to the draw. I enlisted, except it wasn't until later they'd explained, oh, if you enlist, you're in for 4. If you're drafted, you're only in for 2. Do you know what you're about to do? I said, yes. I don't know why, but it seemed like the right thing to do. And as you can see, even at a very early age, my senior officers and NCOs suddenly discovered I had potential. God knows why. But anyway, so throughout there, and of course, if the United States Army at Fort Benning, Georgia, and I did say Fort Benning, Georgia, God bless General Hal Moore, I love him to death. But the reality is, if the United States Army Infantry School had a school, I've been there, done that, got the certifications. So, and survived, I might add. So, and there's my raccoon eyes. So later, after all those schools, the Army was kind enough to send me to where I didn't have to walk everywhere. They sent me to an armored mechanized unit, the 1st Cav Division. And the 1st Cav, in those days, we paid in cash. So every month, even in the field, no matter where we're at, some guy with a lot of MPs around him would show up with a payroll. and take care of it. And I would count out along with my company commander there, and that's me as a baby lieutenant. Well, maybe a senior lieutenant at that point. And we're divvying out cash. Went to the Ranger School as once again. And I'll tell a story about that later on. But the reality is, in the 10th year of my military career, my wife, I was about to go on a deployment. My wife made a threatening comment to me. You need to figure out who you're married to, us or the United States Army. I looked at my calendar for a year, 52 weeks a year, I was in the Army. 48 of those weekends, I was in the Army doing something. And what I had to do is suddenly realize how important is it for me to be at the whatever. And that straightened me out pretty quick because we're still married. 53 years, by the way, yesterday. Anybody want to tell me what that is? 1984 TRS-80 Radio Shack portable computer. My company went crazy the day I brought it in. They said, what in God's name? Well, as I say, from that moment on, I've been into IT, computers, data, digital analysis, et cetera, et cetera. The Army, when I was enlisted, actually figured out this kid knows how to shoot. God, he's been on a farm hunting all his life. I guess he can. So next thing you know, the Army Marksmanship Unit has me signed up at Fort Hood, Texas. And the next thing you know, we're firing and winning competitions around the country, et cetera. And that's my better makeup gear there. We finally moved to the BDUs of the day, if you will. And once again, my lovely wife. After the Army, I spent 2 years teaching poverty-stricken students in the state of North Carolina in one of the poorest counties in this state. Best 2 years of my life. It's something to teach young people who are begging to learn. So, everybody knows how smart the Army assignment officers are. Why would anybody send someone who was from the state of North Carolina to the Alaska cold weather training school, where you get 26 layers of clothing? And I thought you should use every one of them. But I soon found out you need to get rid of all of them but 2 layers. So I learned to do that. But at the same time, there were people at the school, and they decided, you know, about half of the U.S. Army Olympic team, biathlon team, are in the Army. And you shoot really well. Maybe you could teach some of the other guys how to shoot while they're skiing too. So next thing you know, I'm on the U.S. Olympic team. As it turns out, I couldn't ski fast enough. So they said, you teach us how to shoot and we'll take care of the skiing part. So that's kind of where that got to. ROTC, 3 times the NCAA national champions, drill and ceremony. Very proud of that. I'm sitting on the high point of Pikes Peak right there after being shipped to another garden spot, Fort Carson, Colorado. The Army was kind enough to let me shoot lots of stuff. My logbook actually has just over 1 million rounds. If it can be fired, I've shot it. And if I shot it, I was expert at it. You know the little badge they give you and you can put on all the little things you're an expert at? It was so long. So the only thing I have there is, what do I like to shoot? Long guns. So I had a rifle. The Army was also smart enough, I'll use that phrase, he likes guns so much, so let's let him go and test fire weapon systems. I almost had a catastrophe there and got shocked. But so I had a lot of fun because that gave me the opportunity to do all that shooting. Now, another thing, the United States Army, to give you a secondary MOS, decided to send this cowboy to a U.S. Army chaplain school. As my chief of chaplains said at the school when I was walking across the stage and getting my certificate of graduation, and he says, and this is, at that time, PFC Ward, who we think will take care of his chaplain because he is a natural born killer. Okay, so Retirement, they insisted I bring in all this junk and said that we know what you did. Someone we were talking to at supper, we were talking about OCS. So that saber there is for #1 in the class at OCS. They tried to beat the NCO out of an E6. Just promoted to E6, and my first sergeant walked across the company area. Congratulations, Sergeant Ward, on your recent promotion. Me and the other NCOs got together, and we think we're going to recommend you to go to OCS. Why in God's name would you do that? We don't like officers. So the reality is I went to OCS and became an officer. The Army has been kind enough to send me to a lot of things, and one of the things that I cherish the most is the Combat Studies Institute, at that time at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and that is not the federal prison. Thank God. But at that time, so history comes natural to me anyway, and as a result, reading, seeing, and learning the technique of what's known as the battlefield staff ride, it is not a tour. You're going to work your butt off before you ever get onto a battlefield. But when you get there, you're going to be one of the key characters in those battles. So, just an example, and I have done battlefield staff rides in those. So, as I say at the bottom, he learned a lot of stuff. 9 principles of war are what we drive by. If you were to take that and turn that list of the 9 principles of war built on millennia after millennia of war, then you would in fact see exactly what we're supposed to look at when we do a battlefield staff ride. We're actually taking, if you created 2 columns to the right of that list, what you would be doing is you would be saying, in our case, the Civil War, here's the Confederate side, here's the Union side. Which one of those 9 principles of war or was violated and caused the result that occurred? So just an example of what we teach. High water mark, North Carolinian. So I love to dig my friends from Virginia. I love when they start talking about Pickett's charge. And I have to remind them, boys, I appreciate what you did there at the angle. But the reality is that marker is 150 yards in front of where you were at, General Armistead. So that's the reality. North Carolina, specifically the 26th North Carolina, is the only one that actually got to that point. And I will tell you, when the movie Gettysburg came out in Fredericksburg, when it was premiering, I was sitting in the audience. And when the moment came, just before those 3 cannons were let loose into the 26th North Carolina, I jumped and screamed because I knew what was about to happen. I occasionally get invited, not often, but often enough that I have to be ready for it, to do radio presentations. This is what my story is about, and we'll get into the serious stuff. These are the 4 things that I focus on. Every book I wrote and every one of them that are back there are based on that. What's the premise of this? I'm not here to justify the North or South, who's right, who's wrong. What I'm here to do is to tell a story. And this is one of the reasons why I love this group. You're about the people involved and what's the impact on them. So, all that wonderful stuff. So, all of that research that came out of that chest, all those letters, and all those journals, and a haversack with a lot of stuff in it. We'll get into that later. But this was actually up there as well, wrapped in leather, oiled, and unbelievably in great shape when I saw it last. Every item, the artist, a young lady by the name of Melanie Sue Iger out of Pennsylvania, did it. She asked, what style would you like the cover to be on? And I said, primitive art, because that was the art of the day. And I am a country boy, so as a result, it met with that need. This is the cabin that becomes critical, and we'll talk about it in a minute. But each item on that screen has a significance in the book. I'm sorry, What could a butter churn? Really, why is that so important? I won't let you know that until you get to probably about page or chapter 8, and then you can discover what it means. Being from North Carolina, I've actually used a single bit plow. I know that young man right there, I'm willing to bet you what his mom and daddy are telling him to do. I've been the climbing monkey inside of a tobacco barn. I've been the guy that shinnied up the rails and got up there and posted all of those sticks of it. Anybody want to take a guess what that is? You're getting close. It's sugarcane mill. And the mill, in this particular case, the Ward family are famous for their molasses. And there's another product that comes out of cane, and it's called rum. And so we could run it out probably about a 50-gallon barrel at a time. And so when I saw this, when I was going through archives and I found that, I was going, I know exactly where that still used to be. Now, this is actually not a reproduction, but an exact copy of that house that the old Ward family farm was built around. Up in that little pivot right there is where that little hidden spot was. But that's almost a direct replica. So the story begins, our young civilian person who recently married, the father patriarch of 4 Ward families, 4 brothers, and they owned just a little short of 1,100 acres of the Green Swamp in Columbus County. And as a result, our good friend, the father patriarch says, James, I need for you to go to Cartersville up there. You notice that little town right there? So that, by the way, that interstate was not there at that time. But the reality is going cross country, 69 miles, and I'll show you, I think it'll show up in the next slide. I'm not sure why it's not there now. But the reality is that route, 69 miles, give or take a mile, and multiple stops along the way. Started one morning, even before the sun got close, and it took him until almost dark to get all the way to Cartersville. There he was to pick up a much larger wagon, and he had all the goods that they were bartering to get that new wagon inside of the wagon he was driving. So, the Green Swamp. The Green Swamp is about halfway between Whitefield, North Carolina, and Chadburn, North Carolina. And I've turned more dirt there than I ever wanted to go back to. So, on the trip, and once again, I'm not sure why that line's not showing there. It shows the route. That trip occurred, and at this particular point, they're staying that night after they get the wagon, the horses, and all the goods that go with it. They stay overnight because the owner of the foundry in Cartersville is also the principal owner of about everything in there. In other words, the foundry is, in fact, the basis of that community's economy. So they're staying in the boarding house there. While they're at the boarding house, there are 3 Confederate officers. And at the meal table, one of the individuals that are staying at the boarding house asks the question, "Why are you here?" "We're here because we're looking for recruits for this new thing called the 26th North Carolina. And we're thinking about a company from this general area." So the reality is, oh, well, that sounds great, but we're not interested in da-da-da-da-da, because we got farms to take care of. And then the captain pulls out 4 $5 gold pieces, freshly minted from the Charlotte Mint, that has been most recently confiscated by the Confederacy in Charlotte, North Carolina. So with 4 $5 silver dollars, gold dollars, he is enticed, but he hasn't made up his mind because he knows that new bride will not be too keen on his absence for $20 in gold. But why $20 in gold is so important? How can you have almost 1,100 acres and not be rich? Land rich, cash poor. So the reality is those $20 in gold are buying the windows, hinges, locks, doorknobs, nails for that new cabin. They can't live in it yet, so they're staying with Mom and Pop Ward. God, it sounds like my kids. May 28th, 1861, James enlists. His first cousin, who was with him on that wagon trip, Stephen, in fact, enlists 3 days later on May 31st. They end up at Camp Crabtree. Anybody know where the Crabtree Mall is? Congratulations, you've now been to Camp Crabtree, because that's exactly where it is. This is an actual photograph, tintype, that I discovered of Camp Crabtree. That is not Camp Crabtree, but it is a reenactment. And in fact, if you'll notice, I love it. Not that many companies inside of the 26th North Carolina actually wore cappy hats. Most of them wear floppy hats. James actually had a tintype done just after they went up into Virginia in 1863. And in the tintype, he has the rifle that I showed you earlier laying across his lap. And he also has his hat leaning on his knee. And it's just an old felt hat that he went to war with. So, as they say, go as you come, or come as you go. In this case, he's going to go to a camp where he's going to meet some of the most famous people in the history of North Carolina. When we talk especially about the 26th North Carolina, Henry King Burgoyne Jr., of course, very famous boy colonel, et cetera, et cetera. Mr. Vance, Colonel Vance at the time, and then later General Vance, later becomes the governor of North Carolina, and he'll be significant because the Ward family are going to have to get a telegram from Governor Vance saying, I'm giving you a telegram to take to Gettysburg. And here are the three characters depicted. One of the most famous people I love to death, because every time I read him, I go into tears. John Randolph Lane. He's a former commander of the 26th North Carolina following Vance and Burgoyne and others, and in fact is wounded so many times that he ends up coming back multiple times to rejoin the unit as the commander. So, North Carolina, why were we in this mess? Well, the reality is we're in this mess because Jefferson Davis sent a telegram to then Governor Lewis and said, or Ellis rather, and said, Governor, perhaps you should look around. Your neighbors are all about. In other words, look around you. Every state around you, touching you, has in fact joined the Confederacy. Why don't you do it too? Because you're going to be in a bad place when they all start coming to you. But why is North Carolina so important to both the Confederacy and the Union? Railroads. We have a set of lines that are at that time, and as you can see, bonds were being created to extend rail systems that were going north and south, a little bit more east and west, but mostly north and south. The result is, by the 1862, North Carolina is feeding the entire Confederacy. Food's going north and south, west, all of this to, in fact, continue to support. And people wonder why we in North Carolina get a little upset when people give us grief about the Civil War. And by the way, the state legislature voted 3 times by a large majority not to secede from the Union. A lot of people don't realize that. It was only when they got the threat that the other states would immediately come in and take over the state that they realized we got no choice in this. So, just another example. So, we're the last to join the Confederacy, and we're the last out of the war. When it comes to the Appomattox, we're the last ones to turn in the last flag bastion. First battle for the 26th North Carolina, where they draw blood. The only reason this slide's here, because I told you I wasn't going to do arrows and circles. So the 26th North Carolina is located along here. This roadbed becomes critical because it's a weakness in the lines, because they've kind of separated. And as a result, that breach becomes broken by the Union forces after much to do. Lots of stories to tell about the battle, and I love going there because I always go, I think we made some mistakes, but that's another story. So the battle that you read the journals and the letters, James is talking about Malvern Hill. The soldiers are talking about Malvern Hill. Why? Because up to this point, New Bern was bad enough, and they've actually had 2 or 3 skirmishes with Albert Burnside by then. But the reality is, Burnside's not been able to penetrate. Lincoln has said all along, from the very beginning, get everything on the coast, and then we'll work our way in towards Raleigh. And if we can get to Raleigh, guess what? We'll convince that'll become the staging area for the armies, not of the Potomac, but of the Carolinas. Well, didn't turn out that way. They didn't get that far. Malvern Hill becomes really important because of, this is the big battle. Us military guys, we go crazy with maps. See, I like terrain. If you look at those really close lines right there, that means that's steep. So imagine you're climbing up and there's a whole set of battery of cannons lined up, firing. Malvern Hill becomes the biggest, hardest, meanest battle for the 26th North Carolina by the end of the day. It's so bad in the story, and I'll read a little bit of it here shortly. But the reality is, at that point in time, it is so bad, it's almost dark, it becomes dark, and the Union cannons and muskets are firing, and they're less than 45 yards away. So everybody in the 26th North Carolina is hugging Mother Earth just as hard as they can, because they know if they get up, if they make a noise in the dark, it immediately draws fire. So that's that hillside right there that I was just pointing to. So these are actual artist depictions of the particular battle. The main character, James, in fact, on the morning of, when they discovered that the Union has withdrawn in the dark, stands up because his captain, Stephen Brewer, sends a message up to him in the dark, finds him laying on the ground, and tells him all the lieutenants are shot, wounded, or down. You have to lead Company E that last 35 yards. Now, James would be the first one, as he actually said in his journal, I am not the person to lead a company of men. He didn't believe that to be true. If you'll allow me, I'll try to move as fast as I can. So 3 little pieces here, and I'll try to read as fast as I can without losing the context. The next morning began the usual 6 o'clock formation. Roll call was concluded, and the troops were put at ease with no talking. Each company first sergeant took their respective company rolls and passed them to the regimental adjutant, First Lieutenant James Bill Jordan, at the center of the front of the regimental command group. There were short exchanges and brief discussions with each company first sergeant. The first sergeants were then ordered to return to their companies. The only first sergeant left at the front was from Company F. There was obviously something wrong. Murmuring began to filter through Company F. The regimental adjutant did an about-face, moved to the command group, specifically Colonel Vance. Vance did not look particularly happy with what was being discussed. With a wave of his arm, the commander had obviously decided a course of action. Upon return of Lieutenant Jordan to the center front of the regimental formation, he ordered, Private L.M. Blaylock, Private Samuel Blaylock, report to the front. Every eye turned to Company F and their formation. 2 individuals stepped smartly and moved to the front of the formation. They stopped directly in front of the adjutant. No one could hear what was being discussed. Stephen, that's the cousin, turned his head slightly to his right toward James. Ain't that the 2 soldiers we were watching on the parade field the other day? James studied the 2 soldiers as they stood before the adjutant. Not sure, but could be. Why? I just got a feeling about this. but we'll see shortly, I'm sure. Stephen returned his eyes to the front with that silly grin on his face, and you'll have to read the book to understand Stephen. As best James could tell from about 50 yards away, the two privates were from a group that had joined the regiment just after the Battle of New Bern. They had only been in on the rolls for a couple of months at best. The taller Private Keith Blaylock, as he was known, was nearly 6 feet tall, maybe weighing 185 pounds, narrow hips, and of a slightly muscular build. James guessed the shorter Private Samuel Blaylock was about 5.5 feet, probably weighing about 130 pounds, and a stocky build. Other than being a little wide at the hips, James couldn't see anything extraordinary about the two soldiers. What happened next was a pleasant shock to everyone. Lieutenant Jordan pointed at the smaller Private Blaylock's uniform. Sam Blaylock reached for the buttons on the uniform tunic and began to unbutton the jacket. Still facing the lieutenant, he then opened the jacket as directed. The adjutant immediately averted his eyes and then looked at Colonel Vance. The colonel waved his hand in affirmation with a brush of his hand, turned around and left the 26th Regiment formation, along with the command group in tow. Lieutenant Jordan ordered the soldier to button the jacket, but instead Private Samuel Blaylock turned about. Her jacket, wide open, showed the entire regiment an abundant and well-rounded set of breasts for all to see. The entire formation went into wild cheers and shouted. The company commanders and first sergeants lost all control over the regiment. At least they maintained their formation through the troops were falling out and over in laughter. The adjutant finally convinced her to close her jacket and stand at attention. She turned and complied. Both Private Bullock were led to the regimental headquarters tent where they were summarily discharged from duty. Private Samuel Blaylock was none other than Melinda Blaylock and the very proud wife of Private Keith Blaylock. She said he could only enlist if she could go with him. Only 3 people knew she was a woman: the recruiter, the husband, and the wife. Stephen looked at James and said, "I told you there was something strange about those two." James' first reaction was sadness when he saw the woman, not the soldier. His second thought was the young wife he had left behind, how much he missed her at that moment. I'll change a little bit here. This is at Malvern Hill. Nightfall was fast approaching, and there was a strong military need to gain the high ground as soon as practical. The Union forces were massing muskets and cannon fire to defend and deny the high ground. Darkness came over the field very rapidly at that point, but the fire from both the Union muskets and cannons continued to rake the field. Captain Brewer loudly commanded, "Get down and stay down. Remain there for as long as necessary. They can't hit us if they can't see us." Similar commands were moving through the entire regiment. Every man was hugging the ground they could find. It was July and then unusually hot at night. For some reason, many of those men on the hill that night thought it was the coldest night of their lives. Some could not stop shaking. No one raised a hand, much less their head, or shouted a command for fear the Yankee soldiers would continue to fire through most of the night toward any movement or sound. Wounded men could not help but cry out in pain. Each moan and cry was met with indiscriminate musket fire from Union forces. Other troops held a hand over the mouth of those wounded to keep them from drawing fire. Around midnight, James heard a whisper, "James." James first thought the sound came from Lieutenant Hamner, who had been wounded. However, he realized the lieutenant was softly snoring in the night. When he looked over at the dark shape in the night, James was happy to see the lieutenant was still alive and able to sleep. Still not knowing who was calling, he whispered, "Yeah, who is it?" A shuffle came just below him on the hill, and Stephen stopped right at James's boots. "It's me, cousin. Captain told me to find you," Stephen whispered in a hushed tone. "What the hell does he want with me, and how does the hell did you find me in the middle of the night?" James whispered in a rather harsh tone. "He says he wants you to find Lieutenant Hanner and prepare the men to attack those positions directly ahead on command in the morning. And he knew where you were before dark and figured you were smart enough to stay low. He just pointed me in your direction and said to find you. Here I am," Stephen finished. James knew he had that silly grin on his face again without being able to see him in the night. He whispered, "Well, the lieutenant is right here beside of me. He's been wounded in the shoulder. Not sure if it's too serious, but he needs medical help for sure. Can't be moved tonight, though. Noise would get us all killed." Stephen mumbled under his breath, "I guess you get to do it then." "What, me lead the attack?" James couldn't believe he was being asked to lead others up the hill to positions about 35 yards from where they lay. "Don't see any other way, cousin. I'll tell him about the lieutenant being shot and all." Stephen started pushing away. James whispered, "How bad is it?" Stephen hesitated. "We got shot up pretty good, but we still got most of the company around us right now. Pretty sure that Captain Brewer believes we can make that last 35 yards before they can reload," is his thought. "Going to be a mess, though. Tell him I'll do the best I can, about all I can promise." James shrugged in the darkness. "He knows. He said you would say that anyway." Stephen moved away and melted into the darkness. A few moments passed, and James began to think about what he should do. At that moment, Lieutenant Hanner whispered, "You can do this, James. I'll help as much as I can." James turned toward the muffled boys. "Thanks, Lieutenant, but I don't want to do this. I'm not an officer. You are. I don't know how to lead. You do. I think I said that same thing just a few minutes ago when I was elected by the company. You're older, you're smarter, and you know how to survive. Let your instincts tell you what to do. Wake me before morning if I am still alive." The young lieutenant then rolled over and went back to sleep. James spent several more moments thinking about how they would rally and charge the hilltop. He wondered how he would know when Captain Brewer expected him to initiate the attack. He finally realized he had no idea other than to stand and charge the hill. He hoped the troops would follow him. It was almost dawn when someone yelled, "They're gone." James was startled and quickly turned his head in the direction of the shout. "Looks like you might avoid leading the company up that hill after all, James," Lieutenant Hanner slowly rolled with a grimace. James looked down and reached for the bloody rag that covered Hanner's wound. "Glad of that, but I won't believe that until I get to the top of that hill." He kneeled, took another look at the high ground, and then stood, fully expecting a musket to fire and put him out of his misery. Nothing happened. James reached down and gathered his gear. "Company, stand if you're able and come with me to the top." He promptly started walking the last 35 yards by himself. Lieutenant Hanner tried to stand as best he could. It was difficult. A soldier was passing him. "Sir, can I help you up?" Hanner smiled to the soldier and said, "I would appreciate it a great deal. I want to be with that man when he gets to the top." The soldier looked forward and at a fast walking James Ward moving away. "I'll help you, sir, but I'm not sure we can catch you." Malvern Hill would remain in the memory of every living man of the 26th North Carolina Regiment after that battle. All other battles would be measured against the results of Malvern Hill. I had one other passage I wanted to read, but at the end of each chapter of the book, is a letter, and it's one of those letters. In this particular case, it's a letter that's written by the wife, and if I didn't mention it earlier, only married for a couple of months before James leaves. January 23rd, 1863, to Private James Ward, Company E, 26th Regiment of North Carolina Troops, Pettigrew's Brigade, Hess Division, near Richmond, Virginia. My dearest husband. I write to you with a shaking hand, as my nerves seem to desert me at this moment, wonderful moment. I am with child. It was not my intent to burden you with this knowledge before you left at Christmas, since I was not fully aware of my circumstances. If I had known, perhaps it might have made you do something foolish, such as deserting the army. Having you shot for desertion is no way to start our family. Your family was of a similar mind. To say the entire Ward family and my family are happy is to greatly understate their true and obvious feelings about the impending birth. Miss Lizzie and I made the trip to see the doctor, and he seemed pleased and unsurprised at the news. He also made us aware of the local midwife for future references. Given the size of both our families, I don't think we need a reference for a midwife. I'm sure we will use the widow Thompson, as so many have in our families on similar occasions. Your father seems very proud that we're adding to the family. He even went to the general store in Whiteville to secure 10 special cigars from Cuba to give to the other Ward brothers upon the event of the special occasion. Mr. Bryce has already marked 2 of his prime milk cows for our baby's use. Some of the cousins have already started a small padlock for the cows to settle in close to our barn. I know the boys will do a good job, not as good a job as you, but their hearts are really into helping any way they can. Miss Lizzie has gone into a nervous, serious sewing fever, making children's clothes. She also has suggested the need to gather the stored baby clothing from the other 4 families. Of course, we don't know whether it's a boy or a girl, and I don't much care. However, I know you will want a boy to continue the Ward name. I will do my best to accommodate. I would suppose that if we are not successful having a boy, we can try again. Knowing you, I am thinking that will not be so bad as well. Cuddled in your arms is the safest place I think I would ever want to be. Spring fields and planting will start soon, and the men have been busy with finding the best seeds, turning the fields with plows, and mapping out the fields for certain crops. Cow manure, soil, and old fish remains have been collected and prepared for fertilizer. I have started a smaller garden beside our new house down by the green swamp. It will be more than enough for the 3 of us, and with little extra for our tithe to the church. Please give my best to Stephen, and I am so glad to see he is still well. I have included 2 pairs of socks for him. I know he won't wear them unless he has to, but I thought I would make them while I was working in the sewing circle with the other Ward ladies. Know that I love you and can't wait to see your smiling face once again. More important, I want you to see the face of our new child. I'll let you know when it is due, probably in a future letter. I am your most loving and expecting wife, Anna Wallace Ward. Well, I'll break everything before it's over with. I'll try not to get too far away. Well, I'm sure you can tell I get a little emotional about it, and perhaps it'll make a little more sense here shortly. So Bill had a great piece in the Runner this past week. Fantastic, Bill, my compliments. I'm not sure you haven't been to the Command General Staff College and CS yourself. It was well done. And I like day 2 better than most. So my compliments. Back on the table, I actually have my working battlefield staff ride map and everything for each one of the days. And as you can see, Killer Angels was required reading for us baby lieutenants, and I was a baby lieutenant at that particular time. Bill can't remember whether it was you or someone else in one of the other pieces that made a comment about overabundant love of the book Killer Angels. From a tactical standpoint, I totally agree. But to me, and the way we were taught, Killer Angels is not about battle formations and circles. It's about leadership. And for me, it was one of those guiding posts. So I appreciate what you said, though, Bill. Well done. I'm going to break it before it's over. So I'm actually standing on that corner wall at Gettysburg, reading from the 26th North Carolina official records. They're back there on the table as well. And as you can see there, I actually have them in my hands. So I've done probably 7 at Gettysburg, and I have another couple of photographs that will kind of speak to that. But this one's always emotional because, sure enough, I'm going to go to the high water mark at that particular point after I finish. And to this day, I can go over to that North Carolina pink granite monument. I can say, put my hands on the stone, close my eyes and say a prayer. And I swear I hear the cannon. Terry Fox, some of you may know Terry, great tour guide emeritus up at Gettysburg. Terry, I met him on one trip back in the 80s, and we became fast friends. I don't know how many times I've been up there, and in this particular case, that's my son and my daughter at that particular moment. And he was kind enough to take one of those vehicle rides the first time, so we literally were going from June 30th all the way back. And as you'll note, the book actually goes from June 30 that way. So it's an example of we've literally walked the ground together. So it's just an example of that. And of course, McPherson's Ridge, not that none of y'all, and of course, day 2 at Gettysburg. And one of my favorites too, and Bill, can I get on that little roundtable group you're organizing? I'd love to have that conversation, if you don't mind. I'll be quiet. Well, not really. That's an example of the Leonard target rifle that James used. He was actually carrying 3 different rifles at the same time. Members of the Company E, because he and the other sharpshooter assigned to the 26th Company E, the other troops were always volunteering. Let me carry the musket. Let me carry the Whitworth. The Whitworth is, in fact, a rifle he brought from home. In the book, he actually shows how good he is at training because they have a rifle shooting contest. The monuments at Gettysburg always get me because when you read them and you say, well, 1 out of every 4 people who died at Gettysburg were from North Carolina. Well, I'm not sure whether we should be bragging or maybe we're just not very good soldiers. But unfortunately, I'm afraid the story really is we've been placed in some really dangerous places. And as a result, the casualty count was pretty significant. Mort Kunstler, a dear friend, back in the book, I have the battle rosters from Gettysburg, and Mort was kind enough to autograph that. I actually have one of the artist proofs of that original painting. We were together in Fredericksburg on multiple occasions, and he offered me the chance, and he said, I've got a pen and ink drawing. Would you take a look at it, and what do you think? And it was pretty much as you see it there. So a great guy, and I enjoyed meeting him and still stay in touch. So that author's proof today is worth over $28,000. By the way, I paid $1,500 for it. So just some of the cemeteries, and one of those cemeteries would eventually be a temporary resting place for James Ward. He's killed at Gettysburg. On June 24th, 1864, his family, including his wife and child, go to Gettysburg all the way with a letter of requesting safe passage from Governor Vance to go to Gettysburg. And that story in and of itself is pretty significant. As I mentioned about John Lane, to me, one of the really great characters it makes me proud to be a North Carolinian because this man knew how to do it and do it right. Not only was a great orator, but he was shot, and everybody thought he was going to die on July 1st. As a result, lost his teeth, lost part of his tongue, and part of his throat. The gentleman, Mr. McConnell, Sergeant Charles McConnell, it was the man who shot him right at the top of McPherson's Ridge. They get together on the 40th anniversary after the battle. They're the ones standing at the stone wall, reaching over, hand to hand. And McConnell will say later in life, I'm glad I did not kill that man. So they were good friends until both. And of course, by that time, they're both fairly well. At the back of the book, there is the presentation that Colonel Lane always gave to any of the big Civil War groups. He would be really popular here. But he spoke about who are the people inside of the 26th North Carolina and who those troops were. There were only 5 soldiers, including officers, that actually had slaves. Every one of the others, nearly 1,000, were just hard-working farmers, shopkeepers, blacksmiths, people earning a living with their hands. So I quit. All right, now I had supper with some really hard people to deal with, and they said they were going to take me to task on any number of things. So take your shot. I'll try to deflect them as best I can. Yes, sir.
Could you go back a couple slides?
You're asking me to do technology here?
To go backwards where the white there. What is that thing on the top of the light?
It is a scope, sir.
That's a scope.
James, when James in his journal actually talks about it, and he said the colonel gave me this new rifle that we found at Malvern Hill. And he said, can you teach others, because he's also found like 12 others, and they're in fact going to use them, but we need to train them how to do it. So James's first reaction, and he says in his journal, he talks, I put it up to my eyes, and I said, what do I do I can't see the sights because of this thing, not realizing, oh no, you're supposed to look in the thing. So it's a scope, it's a telescopic, long range. In fact, there's one shot that he calls out, and if you go when we did some of the walks to do some of the measurements of particular locations, because we were following the 26th North Carolina's documentation on where certain things happened at certain points. And I'm standing on a piece of ground and I'm going, we start to get out the old measuring stick and we're figuring it out, and that's well over 1,000 yards on one of the shots. Malvern Hill in the early part is actually, there are several other, but he's using his Whitworth most of the time before Malvern Hill. Others. Bill.
Did they teach them how to estimate the range, or how did they figure the range? Because that rifle is going to shoot a parabolic arc.
You are correct, sir. I'm sure there was a lot of time on the range. In fact, James actually talks about how much practice that he had to put in. So let me see it. I don't want to give up too much here, but to answer your question, James becomes deathly ill after Malvern Hill, and he's sent home on furlough for 90 days to recover. In fact, they're pretty sure he's not going to return because he's going to die from dysentery. And the result is, by the time he recovers, he's had lots of time to practice. And he goes deer hunting in his journal with his father. And his father is asking him, what's that funny looking rifle? And he proceeds. And he shoots a deer from over 600 yards away with it. So
He writes about that.
he does. Well, not in the, well, really about the only thing he says in the letters about what he does, he makes it abundantly clear that every time he pulls the trigger, before he pulls it, he always says, God forgive me. Now, that's with that particular rifle. How do we say this? Chivalry would say a man ought to stand before another man and stand there and we're going to shoot at each other. Well, no, this is a different kind of war right now. So, correct. Absolutely. Yes, sir. That's, well, that's partially true, but you're right. That particular weapon did come out of, actually it mentioned Connecticut. Now, I don't know whether that was the distributor or whether it was coming out of the factory, but New Hampshire was in fact the home of it. I can appreciate it. It was a fine piece and it really was very good. But to answer your your question, Bill, I would suggest to you, if you know generally how to shoot, you'll figure it out. Oh, okay. So the sights on the back are right there below the tube. So as a result, you can adjust. And even though I'm from North Carolina, maybe a little Kentucky windage is involved. But I would suggest to you, did he hit every time? I don't have a clue because he didn't ever validate his shot. You know, where I learned to shoot, you log every shot you take. I don't think they were worried about logging anything.
There's lots of ways to be wounded and to die, and lots of post-injury ways to die. How did you die?
Well,
It's going to give away your story.
well, I've already told you he's going to die at Gettysburg. And on July 3rd, where we see the cannon glow in Mort Kunstler's, it's because I know what's about to happen that I get up and scream, because I know. If you haven't figured this part out yet, I'll just quite simply say, and perhaps it'll make some of this presentation more relevant. The young boy that is born is my direct descendant. It was his only son, only child. The only reason I'm standing here is the good Lord has seemed to put me here. So I don't believe in coincidence. I believe in God. And in this particular case, I'm able to tell this story because while he's recovering, he impregnates Miss Anna Wallace Ford. He doesn't know about it until that letter that I read. Please. So when I'm doing book tours and all, and people are walking by, I go, ask me a hard question. And they go, about what? Well, so the large poster, so that big mural is about 9 foot tall and or wide and 6 foot tall. And it is the one thing that draws people into wherever I'm at. I'm glad I didn't have to bring it here and put it up. It's a pain in the butt. Anything else?
Probably a dumb question, but what do you think the gold coins are worth today?
What's an ounce of gold worth now? Oh, 5,000? Yeah. Well, it's 1 ounce coin, so that's about the best. So 4 times 5, that's 20 grand. Well, they could buy the governor's mansion with that. Thanks so much. I appreciate your patience.